Welcome to the Gary Null Show, a program designed to enhance mental, physical, and spiritual well-being through science and the wisdom of the ages. Let us take you on a journey of empowerment. Sit back, relax, and get ready to change your life for good.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null, and I'd like to welcome you back to the Gary Null Show, where we're continuing with a very serious topic, the drugging of our children. Millions of children are waking up today and are going to take a drug that unfortunately will have suicidal ideation, akathisia, the inability to sit still, and yet they're diagnosed as having agitation and put on a drug that causes agitation. They're diagnosed as depressed and given a drug that causes depression. They were happy and now they're thinking about killing themselves or other people. What's wrong with this scenario? Let's watch and see what the real experts have to say.
It's frightening how easy it is for children to be diagnosed. They are being diagnosed by school teachers and by school personnel of all types in all school districts across the country.
I don't think teachers are the best diagnosticians. They certainly are good observers. They can see what happens in a classroom. They can make good comments about what they see in a child, and that can be put into the diagnostic hopper. But I certainly do not agree that they're the ones who make a decision about whether a child should receive or not receive medication. If the child has a problem and needs medication, sure, he should be getting it. But let's leave the school out of it if we can.
You see this phenomena around the world where children are nearly considered a disease.
You don't quite see it around the whole world. It is mostly occurring in North America, in Australia, Great Britain, but beginning to occur on a mass scale around the world because of the efforts of America, which is exporting its way of looking at children.
There are many children in my practices, as well as other neurologists' practice, who are treating children with very severe neurological problems, like in the ADHD spectrum, where medications are extremely valuable and a child would not be able to function without the use of a medication. That's not where I have a problem with medicating children. The problem I have with medicating children is the error that we make of commission, where we're treating children who are just, struggling, but don't have ADHD, but are labeled ADHD because it gets them through the door to get that prescription for the Ritalin or another medication.
So I took him out of that school and I put him in another school. Everything was fine for a while until they got the records from the other school. Then the same thing happened. They started calling me at work saying, Vincent won't sit still, you need to come in and have a meeting. And again, I went to the meeting and they said, you have to put your son on Ritalin or we'll put him in a special school. I took him out of that school and put him in another school, Sunnyvale. And that is where they called CPS, Child Protective Services. And when I was at work, they took my son out of daycare and they put him in an institution. When I got home from work, there was a card on my door from a police officer, and it said, please call me regarding your son.
The Division of Family Services was originally set up to protect children, but I don't see that happening anymore. They're used as a way for people to report one another, for children to even report their parents. Instead of helping children, I see them going into homes, pulling these kids out of homes so that they can put them on drugs.
I called the Sunnyvale Police Department, and then immediately I picked up the phone to call my mother. And the next thing I know, the police officer just came right through my door without even knocking or anything. He grabbed the phone away from me. He says, you're not calling anyone. And he slammed me down. I thought, this guy's crazy. And so I started crawling away from him, and he grabbed my ankles so hard and pulled me back that I still have his fingerprints in my ankles to this day.
if a school pressures a parent to put their child on the drug, and the parent thinking they have to do this in order for their child to attend school, and the child has a bad reaction to that drug, that the school should be held responsible. That's my personal opinion. So you're getting into a dangerous area, a school, which should stick to academics when they go into that area.
When I ask teachers to give me a report, what I ask is for a description of the child's behavior plus the completion of a questionnaire which indicates or suggests that what their level of activity is. It's helpful, but it's not conclusive. In other words, it tells me how a child may be functioning in school and whether or not there are problems. Very often, it is the teacher who may refer a child for evaluation because of their failure to do well in school.
I know for a fact that the schools out there are pressuring parents, and my story is just one story. This whole country is just in a major crisis.
Some teachers expect students to all behave in a very similar way. So when a child may be aggressive, maybe they had too much sugar for breakfast, or maybe they're just naturally more energetic, that child runs a very high probability of being stigmatized for the rest of their life.
When a school teacher or a school psychologist can actually diagnose a child with something that is supposed to be a medical ailment, that's a problem.
The teacher was telling me that he wasn't learning the way he should be learning, that he wouldn't learn unless I opted for the medication, because the medication would help him learn. I unfortunately at that point kind of bowed down to the school and what they were saying and the pressure they were putting on me, and I, went with the drugs.
When you're a stressed, harassed parent, and any of us who have raised children have been stressed, harassed parents, and somebody comes along and says it's not your fault, you've done your best, and gives your child the drug, and all of a sudden your child's easier to manage, it's very easy to misinterpret that as a miracle.
The overprescribing of drugs and the overdiagnosis of ADD says that we are a kind of fix-it-now kind of a society, that will go to any measure to try to solve a problem in the simplest, least painful way.
I think one thing that a lot of parents don't want to admit is just what a nuisance kids are. It gets in the way of the life that they want to live and lead. And now if you're from the working class and you're poor, both parents are having to work, and sometimes more than one job, each of these parents. And so it's very difficult to be able to do the job of raising the kids. And the pharmaceutical companies and the doctors have found a convenient way to prescribe pills so that these people can continue to work lousy jobs for little pay, where they're overworked, they don't get paid for overtime, et cetera, and don't worry about your kids because they're okay, they're properly medicated.
It's just hard for me to accept that the easy way is the right way. Just because it's easy to drug a kid and get them to be compliant doesn't make it right to do it.
Once they get tested, that's it. They get labeled, and they're in that system. The school gets money. The government is paying extra money for this. And so it's to the drug companies, of course, advantage to be able to have this public. It's a captive public, and it's sent in through teachers.
And it's not just the teachers. I want to make this clear. It could be the counselor, it could be the principal, it could be the special ed instructor. I don't want to paint teachers in a bad light. And personally, a lot of teachers are frustrated, and they think this is the answer because that's what they have been told, and they don't really realize the dangers.
There isn't a whole lot of opportunities for unity, for team building between parents and teachers, because we're just in such a fast-paced society that we just don't have the time to sit down and really build a plan that's going to work for that child.
The teachers have such a rough go of it these days. Overcrowded classrooms, textbooks that are 30 years old, roofs that leak. We have made public education such a low priority in our society. We just don't really give a damn about our kids, and that's why we put so little effort into education. And if we can just have them medicated so they don't cause a riot in the classroom, then we're in good shape.
They took my son and they put him in the children's shelter on Union Avenue in San Jose. And this is a locked children's facility. It's like a little child's prison. This facility has been audited by the state several times for code violations. The woman who owns this shelter used to be the mayor of Sunnyvale, where I was arrested. It is a for-profit organization, so they actually make money off of the number of children that they apprehend from parents.
Third grade was just horrendous. He started having severe anxiety. He was not going out for recess. He was telling me, "Mom, I don't feel good. I just want to put my head on the desk and go to sleep." He goes, "It doesn't make me feel good. Don't make me take them. I feel like a freak. I feel like, why do I need this? You know, it doesn't make me feel good."
Makes me kind of feel kind of tired and very, very like dizzy and dopey.
It was just so disturbing. As a parent, it's heart-wrenching to hear that your son doesn't want to take something and you have to basically tell him that the school wants him to take it.
Many of the children that are brought to me by parents state the teachers are concerned because the student's not conforming to a certain type of behavior. This is wholly inappropriate. Teachers don't have licenses to practice medicine, and unfortunately physicians who do have licenses don't look for the underlying etiologies oftentimes. They're very quick to grab a prescription pad.
One would not go to a cab driver for a brain operation, and I am sure that the parents of the United States do not intend in sending their children to the public schools of the country to have teachers diagnosing brain or neurologic disorders.
They put my son on Ritalin against my will, and I was just horrified every week when I went in to visit him. He would have bruises all over him. I could tell he was on drugs because one time his demeanor would be like all lethargic, and the next time he would be bouncing off the walls, or sometimes he'd be talking to me and he'd just make little movements like that, and I go, "What are you doing that for?" But anyway, I noticed, his mental and physical health was deteriorating.
That is really sad that they're taking these small children out of homes and addicting them to these very powerful mind-altering drugs.
Some cases where a kid is being abused, I mean really abused, either physically or sexually, there is certainly a role for somebody to step in and say, "Hey, that's not right." But for not medicating a kid for something which has not been shown to be a valid medical illness is just a little bit, I think, extraordinary.
The major stimulant drugs like amphetamine, dexedrine, and Ritalin disrupt 3 of the most widespread neurotransmitter systems. They actually send them into overdrive. The brain doesn't like this, so the brain fights back and it tries to slow itself down in the face of the overdrive. So that every child on these drugs is having these 3 neurotransmitter systems disrupted, and at the same time is having his or her brain fight back. And it's very unstable, and it's very unpredictable, and as a result, you never quite know how a child is going to react to these drugs, other than over time, the brain's going to compensate very heavily for the drugs.
As a parent, I would never have opted to drug my child. The pediatrician, not even recognizing that the anxiety is coming from the drug, is increasing his dosage, and he was having even more anxiety. He started chewing on everything, chewing on his shirt sleeves, chewing on his pencils, chewing paper, just gnawing everything. And I would go into the school and say, "Listen, he's not going out for recess, he's chewing, this isn't normal." And the school psychologist would say to me, "Well, maybe he has a different disorder."
The children are a captive population in the public schools of the country, and the diagnosing being done by public school personnel, most importantly by teachers, is not at all what the parents have in mind in sending their children to the public schools.
Well, the final straw was one time I came in to visit him, and the whole side of his face was bruised and swollen. And so I said, that's it. You know, I filed for an emergency protective order in federal court, and I took a picture of it as an exhibit, but the judge denied it without even a hearing. So I thought at that point, that's it, I'm getting my son out of there. My son kept begging me, Mommy, please, you know, get me out of here. Why do I have to stay here? He did not understand why he had to be there. So one day I went to visit him, and he was eating breakfast. I just picked him up and I held him, and I said to the counselor, I just want to show him something outside, and I'll be right back. And I just took him outside. I ran down the stairs, put him in the car, and we just drove off, and I drove to Canada.
You know, it's like the big medical authorities are telling you that there's something wrong with your child. Don't buy it.
It is happening nonetheless because it is orchestrated at the very uppermost levels of the U.S. Department of Education and more specifically Office of Special Education in concert with the National Institute of Mental Health.
We were happy in Canada. We were there for about 2 months. Vincent started coming back to normal. You know, my son was so happy. He kept turning the radio up in the car, and he's going, we're out of there, we're out of there. He was so happy. We were both so happy, we were ecstatic.
The pharmaceutical companies have decided that being a child, being an adolescent, is a disease. It's an illness, and somehow it has to be medicated. When in fact, the whole nature of growing up is exactly what those words mean. You are growing up. There is a transition taking place. And anytime you transition, there are ups and downs, there's pain involved, there's sadness involved, there's loss involved, any of a number of things, and you feel this anytime you make a transition in your life. And the first time you start to experience that is as a child and as an adolescent.
No one ever said, you know, it could be the drugs causing your son to act bizarre. I demanded somebody look into this and say, why isn't he going out for recess? Why doesn't he have as many friends? Why is he chewing? And my whys, they led the pediatrician to change his drug over to dexedrine, which is just another stimulant.
My dosage went up and up and up and up and up. It was huge, my dosage.
So he didn't improve. He got worse in actuality.
And one of the problems I see a lot of my colleagues doing is medicating the side effect. In other words, so you have a child now who's depressed because they're on Ritalin, so they give them, you know, Prozac or another antidepressant to take care of the side effect of the Ritalin, or they can't sleep, so they give them a drug to put them to sleep. So all of a sudden, what we've done is we have children, you know, who are on 2 or 3 different medications because we're medicating the side effects of the original medication.
These children are many times given one drug and have side effects, and then another drug is added, and they have side effects from the other drug, and that's where you get 5 or 6 different drugs for one kid.
I'm seeing kids in my practice on 4 and 5 psychiatric drugs who are psychotic or on the way to becoming psychotic. And when I sit down with the family and say, let's examine the life story, what we find is that it began with little Johnny didn't like school, or little Johnny didn't get along with his teacher, or little Johnny was bored in one of his classes, not even all of his classes, and was put on a stimulant medication, and gradually over the years of one drug on another drug, little Johnny becomes a person unrecognizable to his parents.
I think it's quite possible to sort this out with good diagnosis and good monitoring. First of all, you're not going to generally use both stimulant drugs at the same time. You're going to use one or the other in most cases. And then you may or may not put an antidepressant on unless you feel it's warranted in terms of how the kid is functioning or how they're doing, or if somebody is showing serious signs of depression. So it's true, ADHD and depression can exist side by side, and you might want to have somebody on both those medications, and I've seen it happen a number of times.
Follow-up is really important. These medicines change people's brains, and they actually do it fairly quickly. And I think it's important to see somebody in a couple of weeks and then see them in a month and let them have access to you when you're starting medicines or changing medicines, because without appropriate follow-up, people can get into some significant trouble.
Every drug is a foreign chemical. Every drug is a potential poison. I have been consulted in no less than 10 cases of cardiac deaths due to psychotropic medications. The psychostimulants, methylphenidate and the amphetamines, are known to cause high blood pressure, known to cause cardiac arrhythmias, including cardiac arrest and cardiac death. Matthew Smith from just outside of Detroit had been on Ritalin for approximately 5 years. His parents had wanted to take him off of medication because of recurrent chest pain and shortness of breath, but they were coerced to keep him on the medication.
We were told that if we did not follow up with their evaluation of ADHD and take him to the pediatrician and get him on Ritalin, that Child Protective Services could charge us for educational and emotional neglect.
At age 13, while riding his skateboard, he suddenly keeled over and was dead. The county medical examiner said there was no doubt in that case that the chronic administration of the Ritalin was the cause of death.
On the death certificate it says that he died from the use of methylphenidate, Ritalin.
Ritalin is, for the purposes of classification by the Drug Enforcement Administration, is a Schedule II drug on the same list as cocaine.
The Drug Enforcement Administration puts special regulations over how many prescriptions a doctor can write and how a doctor has to write the prescriptions and keep track of the drugs. It even means the DEA can come raid your office if they get the impression that you're giving out too much of this drug. This is not an ordinary drug under the law.
So essentially, we're trying to solve a problem in the schools by putting our children on kiddie cocaine.
Parents will steal their kids' Ritalin and sell it. Kids will sell Ritalin to each other or give it away for recreational purposes. In fact, Ritalin is one of the most commonly stolen and trafficked drugs in the United States, according to the Drug Enforcement Administration. These are very serious addictive drugs.
Show me the science that if I have 5 kids and you've diagnosed them all as ADD or ADHD, that there's something in their brain chemistry, their biochemistry, something in their body that will prove that they have this mental illness, this disease that justifies this prescription medication or this medical treatment. Now, if they have cancer, you can find it. Hepatitis, it's there. Herpes, it's there. Chickenpox, smallpox, mumps, measles, ulcers. Every other medical condition that's a real medical condition, we can find in the body. Can we find ADD in the body? Well, with millions of kids being diagnosed, stigmatizing them and changing the outcome of their life, I would assume that there's a lot of science to prove what school teachers, social workers, state authorities, medical doctors, pediatricians in particular, are suggesting.
At this time, we do not have a diagnostic test for ADHD. Therefore, the validity of the disorder continues to be a problem.
In 1998, the National Institute of Mental Health held what's called a Consensus Development Conference, in which the aim was to push the diagnosis of ADHD and to push the stimulant drugs. They had 30 experts come together to address an objective panel which would then give a consensus as to what the issues were. And the result was a consensus statement which said that ADHD was controversial, that it had no proven biological basis, that there was a risk of over-medicating our children, and that stimulant drugs have a lot of serious adverse effects.
We do not have an independent diagnostic and valid test, such as a biological test or such as a blood test.
I still want to get to the other part of the question, which is just a description of what you might be looking for.
Okay.
But before you go on to that, it sounds a little bit like you're saying that the definition is a little like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography, which is you know it when you see it.
No,
I'm concerned
we're going to disagree, and okay. I would like any member of the panel to describe a typical ADHD in terms of symptomatology. Mark, would you like to? Since you see them in your practice.
I mean, I think the panel has been frank, and the difficulties here are immense in terms of
they were caught in a lie at the consensus conference.
It is hard. It's very hard to know how to answer this question. These kids, in my experience, when you see these kids, they are, several standard deviations different in terms of they cannot sit still, they cannot attend, they cannot, even when they are as if driven by a motive. There are some good clinical descriptions of these kids. I think part of the problem is in the community. When you are a physician and somebody comes to you as a parent and says, my child might have attention deficit disorder, it's very difficult to know what to do. And how much confirmation do you need? Do you need a teacher who also who sees many kids and says, this kid is 2 standard deviations different from the other kids in my classroom? And the parent says, this kid is different.
We're out of time. I'd like to thank you for watching. I look forward to sharing more on our next program.